Hi guys, welcome to my channel. In this video I will give you an overview of API Gateway. So let's get started. In this video we will be discussing following things. What is an API? Types of API? What is an API Gateway? Why use an API Gateway? And then what is AWS API Gateway? So what is an API? An API stands for Application Programming Interface. It is a software interface that allows applications to talk to each other. In our day-to-day life, we use APIs all the time through the applications we are using. For example, every time you do an online payment or checking weather forecast, you are using an API. APIs are mechanisms that enable two software components to communicate to each other using a set of definitions and protocols. For example, the weather department software contains weather information in their server. The weather app on our phone communicates with the server to get the weather data using APIs. The application sending the request is called a client. For example, the weather app in our mobile. And the application sending the response is called the server. Weather department server in above example. So there are three kinds of APIs. HTTP. HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. HTTP APIs use HTTP protocol for communication. HTTP protocol defines how messages are structured and transmitted between clients such as web browsers and applications and servers. Interaction between clients and servers in an HTTP API follows a request-response model. A client sends an HTTP request to a server specifying the desired action, and the server responds with the requested data or performs the requested action. Then another type is REST. REST is representational state transfer. It is an architectural style that defines a set of constraints for designing networked applications. It is a set of principles and best practices for creating scalable and stateless web services. So REST APIs use HTTP as the underlying protocol to implement the principles of REST protocol. They define resources, use standard HTTP methods for operations, and communicate statelessly, and are widely used for building scalable and interoperable web services. So REST are the most widely used services, APIs nowadays. Then another third kind of API is WebSocket. WebSocket allows data to be transmitted in both directions. It is a bidirectional API, that is from client to the server and from server to the client. This bidirectional communication is particularly useful for real-time applications like chat applications. WebSockets enable simultaneous communication in both directions without waiting for a response before sending another message. So it is very well suited for real-time applications. Now, what is an API gateway? An API gateway is an API management tool or a service that acts as an entry point for a collection of backend services or microservices. It sits between a client and the backend service. Its primary function is to manage, optimize, and secure the communication between client applications and the backend services. API gateways play a critical role in modern application architectures, particularly in the context of microservices and distributed systems. So this is a high-level diagram of API gateway. This diagram shows API gateway at a high level as an entry point between the applications, client applications like mobile app, web app, and the backend microservices. So in between we have the API gateway. API gateway is the management tool which manages the APIs. So why use an API gateway? What features does API gateway provides? So here are the key features and functions of an API gateway. Number one, endpoint routing. API gateway manages the routing of incoming requests to the appropriate backend services based on predefined rules or configurations. Request and response transformations. API Gateway can modify the structure of incoming request or outgoing response to ensure compatibility between different client applications and backend services. Protocol translation. API Gateway can translate requests and responses between different communication protocols, allowing clients and services to use different protocols without direct compatibility. Aggregation. API gateways can aggregate data from multiple services into a single response, reducing the number of requests made by the client. Security is an important feature. API Gateway handles security concerns including authentication and authorization. They can enforce access control, validate API keys, and integrate with identity providers. Then another feature is rate limiting and throttling. API gateways can enforce rate limiting and throttling policies, controlling the number of requests a client can make within a specified time period. Then caching. API gateways can implement caching strategies to store and serve frequently requested data, reducing the load on backend services and improving response times. Load balancing. For distributed systems, API gateways can distribute incoming requests across multiple instances of a service to ensure load balancing and fault tolerance. Then analytics. API Gateway also offers analytic features to track API usage patterns, identify popular endpoints and measures to the performance of the API. Error handling. API Gateway handle error responses, providing a consistent and user-friendly experience to clients. Documentation. Many API Gateway tools offer for generating and hosting API documentation, making it easier for developers to understand and use the API. So these are some of the key features of API Gateway. Now let us talk about Amazon API Gateway. So API Gateway is a fully managed service in AWS that makes it easy for developers to create, publish, maintain, monitor and secure APIs at any scale. So all the features that we saw in the last slide, all these are fully managed by AWS API Gateway service. We can create APIs in API Gateway, publish, maintain, monitor and secure APIs at any scale. API Gateway handles all the tasks related to endpoint routing, request response translations, authorization and access control, throttling, monitoring, logging, and API version management. API Gateway can accept and process hundreds of thousands of concurrent API calls. As it is a managed service, you don't have to worry about all these things. So this is a diagram taken from AWS documentation. Here you can see this at this side. These are the clients like connected users and streaming dashboards, mobile applications, web and mobile applications, IoT devices, private applications that can be on VPC and on premises. So all these clients can make API calls through Amazon API Gateway. And API Gateway also caches the request and response, and also it logs all the request response and other logs to Amazon CloudWatch. And at the backend we can have all these AWS services as well as private applications on our VPC or on premises and data centers. So as we know, most modern applications are centered around REST APIs, those familiar GET, POST, put and delete requests that make the web go around. But managing these APIs can be a bit of a headache. You have to handle all the authorization and authentication, set up limits for your API consumers, implement multiple versions of your APIs, and monitoring those API calls. It's a lot to do if you are not using an API gateway. So Amazon API Gateway is a fully managed solution for all these API related seamlessly integrated with AWS auto-scaling capabilities. So in a nutshell, AWS API Gateway is your go-to solution for simplifying the management of REST APIs in a serverless environment. It is like having your own personal API manager, making your life a whole lot easier. So this is all about the overview of API Gateway. In the next videos, we will deep dive into more details with practical demos. If you like the video, please leave your comment, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you have not already subscribed. Thank you for your time.